Hi guys, welcome to our next notes. This is completing the square. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with just a review. Okay, so this is simplify the expression. Hopefully you remember this, where we have a quantity x plus 4 squared. So what that really means is we have x plus 4 times x plus 4. Okay, and when I say simplify, that just means to multiply everything together. So using distributive property, x times x, I get x squared. X times 4 is 4x. 4 times x is 4x. And 4 times 4 is 16. Okay? When we combine like terms, I get x squared plus 8x plus 16. So again, this binomial, when we simplify it, this is what we come up with. Okay. Now the reason that we are reviewing this is it does make a big connection with completing the square. First of all, these are called perfect square trinomials. Okay, so that's the name. It's called a perfect square trinomial. The reason it is called a perfect square trinomial is, you guys see my bx, my b, that is 8. Now, just kind of a cool thing that this does is if I take 8 and divide by 2, I get 4. Okay? When I take that 4 and square it, I get 16. 16 is my C. Okay? Very cool. So again, not every quadratic trinomial can do this. This is only ones that are perfect square trinomials. This is how they start. So let's see this again. So remember that x minus 5 quantity squared is the same thing as x minus 5 times x minus 5. When I use distributive property, it's x times x for x squared. X times 5, negative 5 is negative 5x. Negative 5 times x is negative 5x. Negative 5 times negative 5 is positive 25. When I combine like terms, we get x squared minus 10x plus 25. Again, this is called a perfect square trinomial. Okay, another way to think about it is look how it starts. Okay, this is a binomial quantity squared, but it does have this cool feature where if I take my b from the bx, negative 10, I divide by 2, I get negative 5. If I take negative 5 and square it, so negative 5 times negative 5, I get 25. 25 is my c. Okay, so very cool. So that is our goal today, is we are going to be creating these perfect square trinomials, and we're going to follow that little, cool feature that I showed you off to the side. It's called completing the square, not just a cool feature. Here are the steps for it. We're going to take our b, okay, from that bx, from our standard form. We're going to divide by 2. Okay, so then we're going to square it. After we have divided by 2, and then we're going to add that value to both sides of the equation as we solve by completing the square. Okay, so what I have A, B, and C, these are steps for completing the square. Okay, notice how the C term is missing. Okay, but these are expressions. Okay, so again, these are expressions. We are not solving, but just completing the square. So what we're going to do to complete the square is we're going to figure out what that plus c would be. The way to figure it out, I'm going to go through the steps that I have listed right up here. So step 1, we're going to take our b value, which is 6, divide by 2. When I divide by 2, I get 3. Step 2, I'm going to take that 3 and square it. When I square it, I get 9. Step 3, we're going to add that value to this expression. When we are solving, it would be to both sides of the equation. So I get x squared plus 6x plus 9. Okay, if I wanted this factored, okay, let's just say I wanted this factored, factors of 9, that would add to 3. This would be x plus 3 quantity squared. Okay, so that again is completing the square. Let's try this again for b. For b, step 1, we're going to take my bx, the b from the bx, so that's negative 12. We're going to divide by 2. When I divide by 2, I get negative 6. My second step, I'm going to take negative 6, square it. When I square it, I get 36. step number 3. I'm going to take what I started with, x squared minus 12x. I'm going to add 36 to it. This right here, again, it's my perfect square trinomial. Okay? When I factor it, factors of 36 that would add to negative 12 is x minus 6, x minus 6, but I'm going to just write it as quantity squared. Okay? Let me have you try C on your own, okay, and we'll check that together in class. Now we have practiced completing the square. Now the difference here is we're going to solve by using completing the square, okay? So let's go ahead and try number 1. So for number 1, the only thing that's new is I have stuff with on the other side of the equal sign, okay? And we'll get to that in a little bit. What I'm going to start with is I'm going to take my b, okay, divide by 2. When I take that b and divide by 2, I get 11, okay? 11 squared is 121. So my next step, I'm going to kind of jump down to this part right here, step 3 that we did, where I'm going to add 121. But then I have to include the rest of the equation. So I'm just going to drop down the equal to negative 85. Now I'm going to add 121 to the other side. So thinking back to step number 3 up here, add that value to both sides of the equation. Okay. When we were just practicing with our expressions, we would just, there was no equal sign, we just added it on. Now that we have an equation, okay, and we're solving, we have to use the addition property. If we add something to one side of the equal sign, we have to add it to the other. So our addition property of equality. Okay. Now our next step. Well, there's a lot going on in our next step. One of the things we're going to do is we're going to simplify what we have on the right-hand side. So negative 85 plus 121 is 36. On this side right here, I'm going to go ahead and factor. So factors of 121, that would add to negative 22. That's going to be x minus 11, x minus 11. Okay, from here, I have one more step of factoring. I'm going to go ahead and do x squared minus, what am I doing? Sorry. It's going to be x minus 11 quantity squared equal to 36. Okay. Now, remember when I talked about you're going to have to know how to do perfect square, you're going to have to, when we were solving for quadratic functions, use the perfect square method, or the square root method, that's what it was, square root method. When we have to solve for x, I have to get rid of this squared. So the inverse of squaring is square root. And if I do it to one side, I have to do it to the other. So now I have x minus 11 is equal to positive or negative 6. Okay, thinking back again, I started with x squared. That means I'm going to have 2 answers. So I'm going to break this apart. So I have x minus 11 is equal to positive 6. X minus 11 is equal to negative 6. Okay, so with my 2 answers, I'm going to add 11 to both sides. I have x equals 17. Over here, add 11 to both sides. I have x equals 5. Okay, and that's it. These are my 2 answers. Okay, again, I know that I'm going to have 2 values for x because we started with x squared. Okay, let's try this again for number 2. For number 2, I am going to go ahead and start with completing the square, going through what we did up here. So I'm going to take my b, divide by 2. When I divide by 2, I get 10. Then, step 2, I square it. When I square it, I get 100. Step 3, I'm going to go ahead, rewrite this equation, and I'm going to add 100 to each side of that equation. Okay, now I'm going to simplify and solve for x. So my first step for simplifying, 261 plus 100 is 361. On the other side, I'm going to go ahead and factor, okay? Factors of 100 that would add to 20 is plus 10, okay? Notice, so what we did a few notes ago is when we were solving for x, what we did is we set the equation equal to 0 to solve, okay? Now we're doing something else called completing the square to solve. This is a method you do have to know, okay? Part of one of our Algebra 1 standards. So let's go ahead and keep going. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite as x plus 10 quantity squared equal to 361. From here, to solve for x, my first step is I have to do the inverse of squaring, which is square root. Okay, then I have x plus 10 is equal to positive or negative 361. Remember, I know that it's both positive and negative because it's x squared. I have to have two answers. So right here, we'll break this apart. And then I can get my two answers. Oh, gosh. I don't mean to be making so many mistakes. The square root of 361 is 19. Sorry, folks. Now, if I was recording on my smartboard, you guys would have never known. I could have easily backtracked. Oh, well. And when I do 19 minus 10, I get 9. And x is equal to negative 29. Here are my two values for x. Okay, let's flip it over. All right, let's go ahead and try 5. This is what's different about 5, is now we are going to do it, we are not going to get perfect answers. We're going to go ahead and round our answers to the nearest hundredth, okay? So let's go ahead and start number 5 by subtracting 32 from both sides. When I do this, I get x squared minus 20x is equal to negative 32. We're going to take that b, we're going to divide by 2. When I divide by 2, I get negative 10. Negative 10 squared is 100. So I have x squared minus 20x plus 100. Okay, I have my perfect square trinomial. If I add 100 to one side, we'll add 100 to the next or to the other. Now I'm going to go ahead and start factoring and simplifying to solve. X minus 10 times x minus 10 is my trinomial factor. Negative 32 plus 100 is 68. Quantity squared equal to 68. I'm going to go ahead and find the square root of both sides. X minus 10 is equal to, now I don't get a nice answer. I'm going to write it as positive or negative 68. If you think back, we did this with notes number 1 where we left our answers x equals positive or negative radical 10. We're going to do the same thing right here, as we're going to just leave it as a radical, and only at our very last step will we go ahead and find our two answers. So I'm going to go ahead and add 10 to both sides. When I do that, kind of running out of room, so I'll just do this. I have x is equal to 10 plus or minus the square root of 68. Now the way we're going to do this in our calculator, so I'm going to go ahead and show you real quick. I'm going to hit clear. I have 10 plus radical 68. Okay? And my first answer is approximately 18 and 25 hundredths. Now what's nice with this calculator is I can just go ahead and change that to a minus. And then I have x is approximately 1.75. Okay, so here are my two answers. With the graphing calculator, you just kind of scroll up. You hit the up button and it'll bring that operation back down. I'll go over that with you guys in class with the graphing calculator. Okay, so for number 6, let's kind of walk through this process again. So for number 6, remember our goal is completing the square. To complete the square, we're going to go ahead and start by adding 40 to both sides. Okay, I have x squared minus 10x is equal to 40. Now from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my bx and divide by 2. So here's that process that we need to learn. It's negative 5. We are going to square negative 5. That is positive 25. I'm going to rewrite this so I have x squared minus 10x plus 25 is equal to 40. And if I add 25 to one side, we add it to the other. And so I have my perfect square trinomial. So when I factor this, I can rewrite this as x minus 5 quantity squared. So again, that's the whole goal. We get that perfect square trinomial, so when it's factored, it's written as quantity squared. On the other side, I get 65, and we'll drop that down. To solve for x, I'm going to go ahead and take the square root. I have x minus 5 is equal to positive or negative. This is not a perfect square, so I'm going to leave it as radical 65. Then I'm going to add 5 to both sides. I have x equals 5 plus or minus radical 65. We're going to write our two answers for x using our calculator, rounding to the hundredths. Okay, so one of my answers, I have 13.06. The other one is negative 3.06. And so I think because we're working with a calculator, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and do 7 and 8 in class, and that way we'll have a chance to work these out together and really kind of hone in on the process here. Okay, thank you, and have a good rest of your day. See you next time.